Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name's Simon Hodgkins. It's a real pleasure today to be joined by Toni McLelland. Toni, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you, maybe give us a little bit of a brief introduction. Tell us a little about the wonderful world of people and community and learning and everything you're involved in. So over to you, Toni.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And so I'm Toni McLelland. I'm a critical friend and a business mentor. And I work specifically in the space of social causes and public interest causes. So that's really where my background is. That's what I know and have been knee deep, well, actually neck deep in for the last 30 years. And that's what I want to share because I've kind of used my background really there. I wouldn't even say it as a job or as a career. I call it 30 years of research, Simon, because I've been continually learning and I'm bringing all of that learning back to share with others, back to those social entrepreneurs that are starting out early in their business. Because when I go into these areas of social impact, social justice, social mobility, a lot of it is around, you know, dealing with crisis, dealing with change, contingency planning, risk, you know, people, transformation. So really, when I see those things, I've learned so much over the years. And what I want to do is bring that 360 back to those that are starting out so they have a really great chance in business, because there are some statistics that say that those people that start out in business, some don't even get past the 1 year mark. So let's get them to at least a few years, Simon. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an intro. I'm a critical friend, business mentor for social causes. Plus, I've been called the Queen of Compassion, and I come with my very own fairy dust.
Well, thank you so much for setting the context, Toni. And it's great for everybody watching or listening to this episode, just to get a feel for the area of work you're involved in. And I know you're known all over the world for spreading magic and fairy dust. I know that. And as the Queen of Compassion, it really does all come back to people, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And the principles around people. And as you say, helping people maybe to get that start or to get that help in hand. And I know you're very busy building community and looking to help more people, aren't you, Toni, at the moment?
Absolutely. And I think that that's my focus at this moment in time. Rather than helping, you know, a few people a lot, you know, I'd rather help, well, not rather, but as well as that, I want to help lots more people a little bit. So across the globe. So I'm really looking at building community, really giving to community and sprinkling more fairy dust across the globe.
And when it comes to that social justice that you kind of touched on, right? I know you do a lot of work in this space, and there's kind of like an education here. There's some missing knowledge maybe in some areas. And I know you work with business owners and the C-suite in this space, but it's sort of like critically linked, isn't it? Because people, the nature of the human race, I suppose, is we all have problems and challenges, don't we? And I know you're doing quite a lot in this particular area when it comes to that social justice, that understanding, and helping people maybe who have a bit of a knowledge gap here.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not just social justice, it's social impact, social justice and social mobility. So, and public interest causes. So charities, SMEs, you know, NGOs, they're non-government organizations. So those that are really working in this area, my background is criminal justice, specialist education and care. And so, you know, working with, you know, for example, in the UK, we've got the National Health Service, we've got the Metropolitan Police Service, we've got charities like Minds, mental health. Those are typically my kind of clients that I work with that are serving those vulnerable groups. Because as you say, Simon, it's all about people, and you're getting me all warmed up now.
Well, as well as the great names that you've mentioned as well, I know people like the BBC, people like Coca-Cola, you know, and the Ministry for Justice themselves. And of course, you mentioned the NHS, the National Health Service across the UK, which is a huge organization. I know you've assisted those companies, those people. But I wanted to ask you a question coming back to people and principles and the work that you do, because I suppose if you go back only a few short years, some of this stuff wasn't really on the boardroom agenda. It wasn't really focused on in the way that it needs to be. And we kind of split the world, I think, between the sort of consumers, the B2Cs, if you like, and the businesses, the B2Bs. Whereas you're coming at it from a more, I'm going to say, holistic approach, where you're really coming at it from a, look, we're people, it's a community.
Think
Could you
about
maybe,
the
yeah,
better you build these relationships, you don't have difficult conversations, because the better the relationship, the easier things become. It's another conversation, isn't it? So, you know, you're communicating all the time, you know how to go about it, you know how to approach the person when. So the more you understand that and build those relationships are key to business thriving, you know. And honestly, I just think that people are missing a trick. Plus, you mentioned a few years ago, and I think things like sustainable development goals are really big on the agenda at the moment. And in terms of business becoming sustainable, we had that tricky stage where we had the pandemic, and you know, some survived, some didn't. You know, contingency planning, a lot of them didn't have it in place. Now, you know, we know moving forward that things like environmental, social, and governance agendas, sustainable development goals, corporate social responsibility, DEIB, they are major primary subjects on the agenda. And until businesses get themselves under that, that's really what it's about. But the other piece of it as well, Simon, I think is that, you know, and this goes for big organizations as well as smaller ones. You find that people there's not much differentiation for people between having a great skill, being a great leader, and having great business acumen. They're three separate areas, but you'll find that somebody who is a great people leader might find themselves in a great people role, but have no business clue. They suddenly got £1 million budget and they don't know how to manage it because they've never managed a pound in their life, you know. So, and then you've got people that have the great business acumen that are drive. We've got to make money, but have no people skills. And then you've got the people that are fantastic at, I don't know, IT or a particular area, that think that actually, because I'm so great at this, I can make a great business. But actually, they need to realize at that point that I need other things to make it a good business. I need other people. So for me, it's really marrying those three areas together and understanding that if you're in a larger organization, you need the three, and you don't have to be great at the three. You can delegate. If you don't have good people skills, then maybe there needs to be other people with great people skills in between you and the people. You know, you can stick to writing the policy, but that's the kind of thing that is, and that applies to those that are starting out as well in business. You know, you need to have elements of the three, or at least understand the three. Sorry, I know.
Well, look, it makes sense, and I think, look, we're all different, right? We all bring different skills to the table. But I wanted to ask you: is there any pattern to the bulk of your work? Are you brought in as this sort of change and crisis expert, this specialist to come in to plug that knowledge gap, or are you working with companies that are saying, and organizations that are saying, look, we've got some of this in place, but we need to level up? Like, from your vantage point, do you think that even though it's on the boardroom agenda, even though people know that they need to do this stuff, that enough progress is being made? Or do you see, like, this is a huge area that needs significantly more focus? What's your sort of view on that?
My own personal experience is that I've been in this world of change and crisis. So going into these organizations now, because the 30 years I've been in social impact, justice and mobility, that's the space that I love. That's the space that I know inside out, you know. And part of the reason why it's a real specialist area is because you've got to think about things like safeguarding. You've got to think about things like balancing compassion with business and generating profit, which is a dirty word, you know, for some anyway. And you've got to build in automatically contingency plans. You know, you've got to, they're heavily regulated. So you've got to meet a particular standard before you can go into business. So I do the majority of my business in that area. But it's, again, it all comes back down to people. And while I've been in those industries, I've created my own change model that really helps me to understand people. But what it does mean, Simon, is that skill, I can quite easily share some of my learning with others that aren't in that sector. But that is a sector that I love. That's a sector I know. It's very specialist. And so therefore, I don't feel that a general business consultant or mentor can go into that space unless they know it and understand it.
And I think that's a great point, because it, as you say, you like to term it as 30 years of research. I think that's a good way of putting it. So you're bringing all this expertise and insight to the table. But you've touched on something that I wanted to ask you about, which is this leadership model of change, right? And you've got 4 pillars there, haven't you? And you talk about behavior and learning and environment and network and peer groups. Could you maybe just give us just a little flavor of that? Because it seems to be a model that's really relevant, you know, particularly right now. It's like businesses are kind of, they need this stuff, right?
Yeah, I absolutely do believe that they do. And I think it'll be fair. It will only, let me put it into context, Simon, for you. In criminal justice, I was very interested in behavior, innate, taught, learned, habitual. Why do people enter the criminal justice system? How do they get out of it? What is their journey that led them to this point? So it's really heavily on behavior. I wanted to understand how people change their behavior. So I then entered into learning. I then became, you know, a principal and deputy head teacher of special educational needs provisions, you know, and I was really interested. And I was the one that was saying to the teachers that unless you understand behavior, little Johnny's going to be in detention forevermore. You know, I wanted to understand how people took on board learning, kinesthetic, audio, visual learning. Yeah. When I got to understand that, I then looked into environmental factors, because that took me into a world of young people, looked after children. If you're not in the system and you're out of the system, then how do you engage in that process? So I started to manage children's homes, you know, registered managers in children's homes. And I wanted to understand how learning and behavior makes a difference. Environmental factors make a difference to learning and behavior. So I created a model just based on those 3, but I found that it wasn't working because it needed to be bespoke. So I then added on the network and the development. So the model was actually called the blend model. B for behavior, L for learning, E for environment, N for networks, and D for development, your own self-awareness. So that's how it works. And so for me, when you apply sustainable change, or when you are looking at sustainable change and you look at those 5 areas, some people are stronger in other areas. Some people, it's more about network than environment. Other people, it's more about their behavior that's now become embedded. So you've really got to be able to identify. But what happens is, Simon, the key is people always say, Simon's got to change his behavior. That person's got to change. But we go for behavior change, but it's the longest and hardest thing to change. So we've got to look at other ways. And my principle is about what you apply that behavior to, rather than changing the behavior, change what you're applying it to.
That's very insightful.
I'll
Thank you for
your viewers with that thought just for a moment.
Yeah, I really like that a lot, because you're right. We have all struggled to try to get somebody to change unsuccessfully. But what you're applying that to, I think, is very sage advice. So thanks for sharing that. And I want to come back to learning as well, because it's kind of a thread that runs through what we're talking about here. And you, obviously, you must be constantly learning yourself. You're constantly keeping your finger on the pulse, and you've got all these different elements coming into you. But if you got any advice for people when it comes to learning more about this space, is it as simple as, look, you got to bring an expert in for this, or is there any sort of way you'd ask people to start if they want to fix some of this sort of change and crisis and
Well,
situation?
the thing about it is that it starts with people. That's what I'm just going to say. Quite often I'll have an organization say, Toni, we need some help from you. Here's all our documents. There's a 200-page document, 100-page business plan strategy. And I'm like, well, actually, do you know what? I'm not going to find the answer in that. I'm going to find the answer when I come into your organization and I look. I have a couple of conversations in the staff room with the movers and shakers. They're not sitting in the big office usually. I sit in the back of a leadership meeting and just observe and listen, you know, and really just kind of feel the organization. And I know Edgar Schein, who I'm a great fan of, you know, writes about organizational culture and the 3 different layers. So that is really what it's about. And when I spend that day in your organization doing that, I'm going to be 80% nearer to my answer than reading all this documentation. So I'm going to say to people, you know, leaders, think about people, think about compassion. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are foundational to this. Just take a step back and just going back to what you said there about continually learning. When you're going into a team meeting, don't go in there with the intention to impart knowledge all the time. Go with the intention, what am I going to learn from this meeting today? Because that's what it's about. And it's about empowering others. And when they are empowered, your work becomes lighter.
I love that. I love that when you're empowering people, your work becomes lighter. And I also love what you said about going to meetings. We've all sat in many, many meetings where the person next to you or opposite you just really wants to hear themselves talk or offer their own opinions. And they're not coming to that meeting with the objective of learning something new. And I think just that little mental switch, such an insightful observation. And I suppose the other thing, just going back to what you started off by saying there, is you're not just going in with the advice, but you're actually listening. You're sort of immersing yourself in their world and their environment, aren't you? That seems to be.
And I think what it is, because when I go into these crisis situations or change, you know, usually you haven't got a year. You've got 3 or 4 months to show a difference because they're, you know, losing money or something's happening that needs a real good. So you haven't got time to introduce the long executive coaching for a year or all these things. And you know that you're not going to be there for very long. So what you need to do is you need to empower them to be and get them to do the work so that you can step away after a few months knowing that it's embedded. So that's really key, that they don't become reliant upon you, that you can move away. So that's really, really important. So empowering is a real big piece. And, you know, in terms of, you know, egos, and people wanting to become powerful. You don't become powerful by holding on to power. You become more powerful by giving it away to empower others. Because the more you give it away, the more comes back to you. The more you give it away, the more comes back. Yeah. And then, you know, so even when I've managed large teams, 80% of my work has been the people. The people are my work. Then the 20% that I do, which is usually signing things that no one else can sign, then that's it. I make sure I don't miss a supervision or a one-to-one, or I make sure that they're all right, because if you count the smiles, the KPIs will take care of themselves.
All right, love that too. If you count the smiles, the KPIs will take care of themselves. I'm definitely using that one.
Go.
Look, before we run out of time, I do want to squeeze a couple of questions in. One is, you said at the very top when we started talking today that you're hoping to maybe engage with more people, help more people a little bit. And I think there's a huge job to be done there. But what does that look like in reality over, say, the next 6 to 12 months? How do you go about planning that? What's on your horizon, your roadmap? What are you looking to achieve as you go forward? How does that work in your world?
Well, it's about building community. I built a community a couple of years ago. It was in a different format, a different guise. So I'm reshaping it. And, I just kind of feel that I want to come into contact with more than people that are not just clients. People are reaching out to me all of the time. And I just feel that, well, actually, here's your space that you can come, you can get some fairy dust, we can have some fun, we can learn together. I learn about you, you learn about me, and we learn about others. And for me, it's really, really important that, because there is this thing about, people always pushing their businesses and wanting to sound interesting. Well, actually, let's be interested in others than being interesting. And I think for me, it's really about inspiring and empowering others to be the best version of themselves rather than a mediocre version of someone else. And so for me, that's about building community, building a global community, and just really being there and open in this open space for people for an hour a week. That's really where I'm taking it. That's the next piece, and got some really good things lined up for that.
Well, listen, that's great. And just before we do wrap up, I wanted to ask you then. So I know it's all about people and community, but if people want to get on your community radar or get a little bit of this fairy dust, what's the best way of them engaging with you?
I saw the little shoulder wiggle
there. Did you
there.
see that? Did you? So how do they get a little bit of that? How do they get access to that sort of community? And also, is there anything that you'd like to maybe touch on that maybe I haven't asked you, or anything you'd like to leave us with as some last thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say that anybody, I'm just trying to make it as inclusive as possible. There's a community that is just, if people, are a bit isolated or working on their own, they can come and be a part of that. There is another piece that I'm doing for social entrepreneurs, and that's for people that are starting out their business and they need some regular help. I've made it accessible to many and affordable to others. So, there are a couple of options there. But I just want to say that really, I'm just so passionate, because whilst I do my work with these larger organizations, managing change crisis by applying diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and compassion for sustainability, I'm really, really passionate about helping others who are social entrepreneurs in this space, want to develop their skills, their business acumen, and of course get some of the magical fairy dust. So for me, that's really important. And I think it's really kind of come from, my parents and the people that inspire me, really. My dad, who has passed a few years ago now, he was really the champion who is my, I'm so inspired by what he achieved and what he done. And some of it I didn't even realize until, afterwards, after he'd really gone, those messages, this is what he meant, this is what he was talking about. And what I do now is I take some of that learning that I got from him, and I share that with my clients, and they're still benefiting from it now. So for me, I know it was really, really valuable. So, I know that one of the things was about who inspires me. Well, actually, my people are closer to home. Some of them were previous managers and leaders that, really trusted me, and others are closer to home, like mum. Mum, she was like a nest builder. It was all about, there was always people in our house, and, it was always, it was always a social thing, you know. So for me, that was really, really important. She was a caretaker and still is now. And my dad was the older man that was full of wisdom and you know, lots of great stories at his funeral about how he brought people together, and some of them were coming from people that I didn't even know, and sharing stories of things that I wasn't even aware of. And I thought, well, hey, that's really great. And he gave me some really good advice. So some of the advice that I've got is from him. One of the things that he would say to me was never give up sure for unsure. So if you're stuck and you need a decision, and I think, oh, Dad, what shall I do? Say, never give up sure for unsure. And even now I think about that, what's sure and what's unsure, where does this decision go? And I share that with others. My husband is another person that inspires me, because one of his things is, he says, if you hang about a barber's long enough, you will end up getting your hair cut. And even if, you know, I say that even if you have no hair, you'll get a close shave, even that after a while. And despite the fact that he says this saying, I've kind of tried to come back at it with something, but it's absolutely spot on. It's right. So just by being around the right people can really make a difference. And that's another reason why I'm building the community. But I'm going to leave your listeners with a final message, and that is about being the best version of themselves, recognizing that, hey, I'm good at this, I'm great at this, and actually not so good at that, so let me rally a team around me. And you know, because I'm one to concentrate. I really don't push business, but I concentrate on delivering great quality stuff, great results, to the point where I'm still working with people I met 30 years ago, because that's built on relationships and results. They know what they're going to get. So I'm going to leave the message for those social entrepreneurs out there, which is, don't chase money, chase results, and then the money chases you. And I'm going to add the last bit, which is, occasionally you have to slow down enough for it to catch you.
I like that.
And I'm going to leave it at that.
Do you know, that's wonderful. You've dropped so much inspiration and wisdom and gems, and dare I say again, fairy dust throughout this conversation. So let me just double check. If people want to catch up with you and get onto your community radar, where do you want to point them to?
You mean if they want a small bit of fairy dust or a big bit of fairy dust or a bucket full, then what they can do is they can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me, Toni McLelland, MSc. That's the best place to find me. For more information about my work, it's on my profile, but they can also check out www.1st life groups. That's first life group with the digit 1.com. So www.firstlifegroup.com.
It does bring us nicely to the end of this episode, at least, of the Global Discussion. I want to thank real quick people for watching or listening to our discussion today. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do the things I need you to do to help support the podcast. And I hope that you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers and people like Toni McLelland. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for spending time with us, Toni.
Thank you so much for having me.